I think if there's anyone around the Sonic community who is qualified enough to talk about the difficulty of Sonic Frontiers, it's gotta be the devs themselves, because they made the game so they know what they're talking about. But I have quite the experience with varying difficulties in this game, and this topic of discussion is something that I've wanted to cover for quite some time now, and I'm not really sure what challenge I want to do next, so if you consider this to be snack filler episodes, you're not real. Just to make some things clear before I start talking, I love Frontiers, and nothing I say in this video is in any way an attack on the developers. They did a great job with what this game offers. But as I said in the title, Sonic Frontiers has a difficulty problem, and it's probably the biggest issue that this game has, and to begin discussing this, we need to set the scene a little bit. You boot up Sonic Frontiers for the first time and are presented with the option of 3 difficulties: easy, normal, or hard. Hard difficulty says that it is aimed at experienced players, so when I played the game on day 1, that's what I chose. And here I was thinking that I would be presented with a game that has me repeating combat encounters and cyberspace stages to not only get the items I need, but to actually win the encounter. In cyberspace, I guess it had me returning with some stages, but with combat it was rare, especially with the bosses. They are the most exciting part of the game and simultaneously the easiest as well. Because of how Supersonic was designed, he doesn't take any damage or lose any rings upon being hit, and going by the usual Supersonic rule of losing 1 ring per second, you have well over 6 minutes to beat each boss, and that is with your stats at level 1. At max stats, you have just over 18 minutes to beat the boss, and your attack power will be so high you can clear each phase within 2 strikes. Like, what? Anyway, that's progression related, and I'll save that for later on. What I do want to talk about in this section of the video is the game's difficulty options. The default 3 seem to just boost enemy HP and maybe attack rate, but there is a 4th option. Upon beating Supreme and the End for the first time, no idea if it applies to another story's ending as well, you will unlock Battle Rush. Pretty simple concept, you face the enemies of each island and are graded only on time. That's a glaring issue in itself, but not the main point once again. Beat all the challenges with an S rank and you will unlock Extreme Difficulty. Now, what does Extreme Difficulty change, you might ask? A basic rundown would be that it eliminates all need for progression while buffing enemy HP, makes cyberspace harder by 3 seconds, and kills Sonic in one shot. Yeah, that doesn't sound very fun, does it? But like, when the game came out, Extreme Difficulty was exactly what was needed. The game applies loads of safety nets for you to never get hurt, and even if you do get hurt, it's not exactly detrimental to the gameplay. You got hurt? Just pick your rings back up. Died in cyberspace? Go back to the checkpoint. Died in open zone? Your nearest respawn point is never usually too far. Got hurt by a boss? Don't make me laugh. So with the update that gave us Extreme Difficulty, it skipped a lot of the safety nets. With stats locked at level 1, it bypasses the kind of annoying progression system while also providing longer combat challenges with the boosted HP from enemies. And with 1-hit KO in place, regardless of your ring count, it was death upon damage, so going back to your recent checkpoint was what you had to deal with each time. Extreme Difficulty was what we needed, but what we got wasn't what we wanted. People were complaining that the game was too easy, but they handled it in the wrong way. I personally do not think that buffing enemy HP increases difficulty, nor making everything a 1-hit KO. It's just frustrating. And high frustration does not equal high difficulty. You would think that all this feedback was taken into account for the release of the Final Horizon, and it was, but it was taken way too far. We got Guardians that were so unbalanced you needed max stats at bare minimum to take them out, but even then, ring count and parry windows could easily save you. But also, landing your parries didn't even give you an opener for most of these Guardians, and even after the balance patch, they still don't. And then Master King Coco's boss trial fixed our problem with the bosses by giving us a perfect parry window that was 1 fucking frame long. I think they definitely had the right idea with the Final Horizon, and I completely agree with taking the checkpoints away in cyberspace, but not progression if you die. Trust me, nobody wants to save the animals if you lose them when you respawn. It makes no sense. But then combine that with Extreme Difficulty, and you're in for a bad time. Extreme Difficulty highlights all the issues that the game has, and from my experience in playing it, it is completely for the best if you just stick to hard difficulty or lower for the DLC. I'm gonna make a quick comparison to a couple of other games that I think do really understand how basic mechanics can make or break a game's difficulty. Frontier's problem is just all the safety nets it has. You have a practically infinite parry window, and the game even tells you that it is unnecessary to time your parry correctly, as it takes full effect upon hit and you can counter with a Grand Slam. This mechanic is so overused that it can clean take out all the bosses with next to no effort. There's 3 games that I want to bring up, and the first one is Stellar Blade. Like I said already, buffing enemy HP does not make for a harder difficulty, and while Stellar Blade does do this, it's not to an extent where it's frustrating, except for maybe like 3 of the bosses. But the difficulty isn't the point here, the base fighting mechanics are. The game handles 3 gauges, your beta gauge, burst gauge, and the enemy's balance. You can charge your beta gauge simply by hitting your enemy, and it will raise over time, and you could spend some of it to either counterattack a perfect parry, or use a special beta move, which has Eve pull off these really sick moves, one of which actually looks like cross slash. These moves are very powerful and can even lower the enemy's balance. Burst works similarly, but instead of raising by attacking, it raises by dodging. You can perfect dodge most attacks, and this will raise your burst gauge, which can either be used to further complement your counterattacks, or be spent on moves even more powerful than the beta skills. But note that it only recharges upon perfect dodging. A standard dodge won't do anything for it. The enemy's balance can be lowered by perfect parrying and will drop by 1 unit for each parry, but the game separates parrying from perfect parrying. So while both are defensive enough, only by improving your timing can you weaken the enemy in return. Upon bringing the balance meter to 0, you can pull off Retribution, which does a hefty chunk of damage. Do you see where I'm going with this? The next game I wanted to mention in this is Bayonetta. I think making the comparison to Bayonetta is important since Frontier's combat was initially going to be heavily influenced by Bayonetta, and some of it shows, but the issue sticks out like a sore thumb. If you've never played it before, Bayonetta uses a hack and slash combat system which relies on dodging for consistent gameplay. While not difficult in itself to pull off, perfect dodging will activate Witch Time, which slows down time around Bayonetta and grants some points in the magic gauge which can be used for special moves. The slowdown also allows for enough time to pull off one of the many unique combos, and with a higher combo score, grants higher reward to progress. Another method of activating Witch Time is by using a perfect parry with the Moon of Mahakala accessory. I definitely spelled this wrong. Basically, this accessory grants the ability to parry by flicking or tapping movement control in the direction you got hit. A parry will nullify damage completely, but time it frame perfect, and the perfect parry will have Bayonetta stun the enemy, grant some magic power, and activate Witch Time. A higher skill cap for a higher reward. That's the way to go for a balanced game. If you pump the difficulty as high as Infinite Climax mode, enemy stat wise it is a complete clone of hard difficulty, with the major change being that perfect dodging no longer grants any Witch Time, forcing you to learn the higher skill techniques to make it through the game. Do you see where I'm going with this? The last game to make a comparison to is the remake of Resident Evil 4, and it kind of frustrates me that nobody is talking about this. It's such a simple change across difficulties. Basically, Resident Evil 4 is the first game in the series to include a parry in the game, which lets Leon and Ada defend themselves against most enemies by blocking their attacks with a knife. It does not go any further than this. Sometimes the enemy will be stunned for a counterattack, and sometimes they won't. There's nothing else to it. Except that between assisted and hardcore difficulty, while the timing is still necessary, you can just spam the parry button on the lead up to getting hit and you will still block it. It's counteracted by the fact that you can't parry every attack as far as I know. Those attacks can be dodged, but only when the prompt appears. When you put the difficulty up to professional, autosaving is disabled, enemies have higher HP and damage, and the ability to mash parry when being attacked is removed, forcing you to properly time the parries with the enemy attacks. Do you see where I'm going with this? I get that implementing loads of things in a Sonic game where so much shit is already thrown in your face when you finish the tutorial could be frustrating, but hear me out. I know the game has Phantom Rush already, but I feel like this should be used as more of a state when Sonic's additional skills can actually be used at the expenditure of the gauge, like in Stellar Blade, with the gauge building up with damaging, dodging, or parrying. Grand Slam could be made in a way where there has to be enough perfect parries before using it, also like in Stellar Blade. Sure, allow for the infinite parry window, but have perfect parries reward the player more. As far as extreme difficulty goes, it should have implemented similarly to what Bayonetta and RE4 do, as in remove the slowdown from basic parries, or remove the basic parry completely and only allow for perfect parrying. Maybe with a window longer than 4 frames, Sonic Team, please? Okay, I think I've made my point clear with the actual difficulty. I'll make another short point about the skills later on, but for now, let's touch on the game's progression. Everyone loves a good fishing minigame. I know I do, even Stellar Blade has one. Upon the release of Frontiers, fishing would cost resources, so you had to find purple fishing coins scattered around the islands. And while they were in limited supply, you could generate an infinite amount of them through Starfall. But this was rare, and getting a jackpot was not guaranteed. But then within days of the game's release comes a Monster Hunter DLC, which added a cooking minigame to the fishing spots, which did not require any fishing tokens to do, and the rewards were pretty solid, especially scaled up on the final island. And with your rewards, you can buy your way to max level, and even progress the story. With the Monster Hunter DLC in place, you can just head straight to the portal without finding any tokens. Do I think this is a bad idea? Yes. Nothing else in the game scales with Sonic stats either. Thankfully they don't apply in cyberspace, so maxing out your speed won't make a difference. He also has a speed cap in bosses, and takes no damage anyway, so only attack power and ring count affect them. We've already discussed what the issue is there anyway. What the problem is here is that the islands do not get more challenging as you progress. There is no incentive at all to upgrade your stats since it's easy enough, and there is no level cap on the islands, which means there is nothing stopping you from maxing out everything on Kronos Island, making the rest of the game easier than it already is. There's a reason why some combat revamp mods take this into consideration. One example is Hedgehog May Cry, which caps your stats at level 1, thereby balancing everything based on those stats. This is definitely a good idea since the mod is designed to streamline progression, but for the base product, I would disagree. Another mod which addresses this issue is Chaos Polarity, which toughens the combat in the game while also giving you a proper incentive to level up, rewarding you with new skills or abilities as Sonic reaches certain levels. Now I know I'm basically using mods against the devs here, that's not what I'm getting at. I'm only using them as examples for what could be different in the next game. I don't want anyone to be weaponizing mods against the devs, because I can also guarantee that isn't what the mod creators want you doing. In short, I just think the progression makes as much sense as it doesn't. If you progress by actually finding Cocoa and Seeds of Power instead of fishing, I guess it can work properly, but realistically, who actually does that? Let me let out some frustration. Why is this possible? There is no cost to using any of Sonic's skills, except the cost of unlocking them. The skill tree is really bland, as in everything is like max power as soon as it's unlocked. Quick Psyloop, which is a really crucial part of keeping the combat flowing, is unlocked way too late to be worthwhile. And Stomp, which is far too powerful for what it does, is unlocked far too early. Why doesn't Sonic Boom transform into Cross Slash later on? Why doesn't Psyloop get the Quick Psyloop ability added to it in progression? Why doesn't Stomp start off weak, but then have that Stomp Flurry that was unimplemented later on? The skill tree, like standard progression, is a little too easy to unlock, and what you're rewarded with is just too strong for its own good. I think linking the power of skills to the level of Sonic stats would have made for some very interesting gameplay changes as you go through. I've just realized that doesn't really make any sense, but I'll explain it with text on the screen. I don't want to drag out talking about skills because that's really the main part I wanted to mention. Like I said earlier, I think the use of skills should be linked to the Phantom Rush meter, similar to how Stellar Blade makes use of skills. I also think some form of move scaling would work too. In Bayonetta, if you repeat the same combo, you get less score for it as opposed to mixing it up a bit. I'm sure the next Frontier style game will have some form of it. I guess you could bring all this together and say it was probably part of the vision of Frontiers, but the devs ran out of time, which I can definitely get behind. Frontiers is one of my favourite games and I really like the final product, so I guess this video was less of a criticism of Frontiers and more of a vision for what its successor could look like. I hope you guys enjoyed what I had to say and I appreciate you for making it this far. Be sure to leave a like and drop a comment on your thoughts on the topic as well, and don't forget to subscribe either. You can also support me by coming around my Twitch channel where we play a variety of different games and just have a good time with lots of community involvement too. You can find me over there as Snackpigeon with a 1 and a 0. Anyway, that's everything from me today. My name is Snack, and I'll see you in the next one.